Milton Farmer Page was a notorious rum runner, liquor importer, and Los Angeles casino owner when all of those activities were illegal. But he didn't care. Born January 4, 1887, he grew up quickly, like an entire generation of preteens who knew the mean streets of cities like New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles for what they were, a dangerous training ground for crooks, punks, and gangsters. Page did better than most. Farmer Page hawked newspapers for a penny each at the turn of the century, and according to legend, after finishing grammar school, he took to local alleys along 2nd and Spring Streets, where he positioned friends as lookouts and played dice with less informed newsboys. His fortunes grew, and so did his standing in the local under-18 community. Next came poker and sports. Farmer got his name for wearing a farmer's hat to school, but leaned towards horse racing and bookmaking. His brother Stanley was a jockey with plenty of insider information to share. Together they toured the country, Stanley as a jockey, Farmer as a valet and starter, and both as dice and card sharps. In 1916, the brothers booked county fairs and local races while getting race information from the Tennis General News Bureau out of Chicago, the nation's first over-the-wire race service. Their work was rewarded, and they opened their first local race book in 1917 in the basement of the Del Monte Bar on West 3rd Street in downtown LA. By his early 30s, Page had at least 6 profitable casinos with craps, blackjack, poker, and a few slot machines. None of his clubs have roulette. It was too hard to move a roulette wheel when you were covering up the evidence. Next came the Page's El Dorado Casino in a downtown office building. Each of the casinos had double wooden doors with steel bars, so the police would waste time using axes to chop into the clubs. That was time Farmer used to take the emergency exit. Later, Page was more adept at getting cash to the poorly paid police officers. Then he only needed to let them raid his clubs each month, send some money to them, and send a bagman to bail out his dealers. Then came Prohibition and even greater profits, leading to real estate deals, warehouses, liquor storage facilities, and more dangerous competition. But the arrival of the hijackers, some like Tony Cornero, who swore he only hit those who had previously robbed him, turned LA County into a danger zone. By 1924, those same hijackers were worming their way into the 6 highly profitable gaming joints that Page Brothers owned, and were methodically executing their raids. Clubs on West 3rd and Spring Streets were robbed. When Steve Brody drew his gun in another club, he took several shots at Farmer, before being shot by an armed guard. He was alive when the police arrived, recovered in the hospital, and disappeared into the night. The police responded that Mr. Brody was trying to shoot himself, not Page, and that Mr. Page understood and even paid his hospital bill before the gentleman left town. It was a sweet story. Ever heard of someone tripping and hurting themselves called taking a Brody? Yeah, I think that's where that came from. In early 1925, Al Josephs, a local gunman and gaming rival, was shot dead with a .32 caliber gun, 1 bullet in the back. Farmer Page knew there were witnesses that hadn't yet been convinced to keep their story straight, so he turned himself into the police and pleaded self-defense, with 2 shots fired and him alive because, well, Joseph had tried to draw his gun first, but it got caught in his vest. The police found 5 shots had been fired at the scene, and at least one other person at Bert the Barber's place was shot. That person disappeared. Later, so did Page. The building was owned by the Seaboard Development Company, of which Mr. William Gibbs McAdoo was the chief shareholder. He was a former U.S. Secretary of the Treasury, and son-in-law of President Woodrow Wilson. Yeah, there's no conflict there. Farmer Page was acquitted. On March 28, 1926, Page's bodyguard, Walter Hesketh, was gunned down on 6th Street. Tony Cornero and his brother Frank were jailed. Hesketh refused to squeal on the 2 gentlemen, and he subsequently died. 3 witnesses 10 feet from the shooting couldn't identify the killer. The Corneros strolled out of jail. In the meantime, Farmer Page owned the Johanna Smith, a gambling boat, and he competed with the Mont Falcone, which beat him to the water by just a few months. Both ships were located off the coast and available by water taxi from the Ventura City Marina. Farmer never served liquor on the ship, but he was still forced to tow his Johannes Smith 14 miles south and to a spot 3 miles beyond the coast off Point Magoo, then up the west coast to Oregon after considerable heat from local and state government officials. Although the state of California and the U.S. Internal Revenue Service thought bootleggers and gamblers like Guy McAfee, Farmer Page, Charlie Crawford, and Tony Cornero owed hundreds of thousands of dollars in back taxes, the businessmen paid virtually nothing, as noted in an LA Times newspaper column. Just how did those men buy those gambling boats? How did they avoid arrest? Meantime, Sheriff William I. Traeger, a friend to McAfee, Cornero, and Page, was investigated for his huge re-election expenses. Where did he get the money for that, they wondered. Farmer Page went on trial during a gambling probe in 1935. Half a dozen prime gambling suspects joined him. Most took the hint and began divesting themselves of local clubs and real estate. Page was stubborn. He lasted longer. Proof of Page's love of gambling emerged before the trial when it was revealed that when the Montfalcone was still at sea, he once took several checks and $20,000 in gold coins to hit the floating casino and his competitors' gaming tables. He didn't make a profit that night. In 1939, Guy McAfee bought the Paradise Club on Highway 91 in Las Vegas, which soon became the Strip. He renamed it the 91 Club. He and LA casino partners Marion Hicks, Tutor Scherer, fit nicely into Las Vegas and eventually owned 7 casinos. Back in LA, Bugsy Siegel is rich with several casino partners of his own, including Farmer Page, and a nice place on the Sunset Strip they called the Clover Club. But still, Vegas beckons. Tony Cornero's floating SS Rex is confiscated, forcing him to lay low for several years. But Page, Bugsy, and Meyer Lansky are eyeing Vegas as the place to be. Farmer Page didn't just show up in Las Vegas without any plans. First, he exercised his collaboration with several Chicago outfit and mob ties by obtaining a piece of the El Rancho Vegas, as many others before and after him did. He shared the profits for several years, taking a more significant piece when Bugsy's Flamingo Casino dominated the mob's investment in Sin City, and Bugsy was forced to scrounge for several $1 million to shore up the growing hole in the desert that he kept filling with cash. Farmer Page partnered with Tutor Scherer and Marion Hicks in multiple properties over the years, but he wasn't a partner in building the Thunderbird. That deal was arranged with Guy McAfee, Tutor Scherer, Marion Hicks, and Clifford Big Juice Jones, a former lieutenant governor of Nevada. When the small casino opened on September 2, 1948, congenial competitors like Page and Jake Kettleman, who owned the El Rancho across the highway, gave the new club some business. Their hot run at the craps table busted the casino's bank, and while the owners scrambled to pay out $160,000, a call went to Meyer Lansky to front the cash. Lansky, good guy that he was, agreed. Of course, that made Jack Lansky, his brother, the new casino manager, and the Thunderbird became a mob casino with a nice skim going eastward every 2 weeks. As for Page, he took his winnings and convinced Scherer to give up a piece of the Pioneer Club. That whole night is sometimes called the craps game that put the Thunderbird in the shitter. Milton Page also picked up a piece of the Boulder Club, another small casino in the downtown area. He held it until he passed on September 8, 1960. The casino's partners had a pact that the club would be sold upon anyone's death, so farmer's widow Ruth agreed to close the club so the Horseshoe Casino next door, previously named the El Dorado, could tear down a wall and take over the casino space. Thanks very much for visiting Nevada Gaming History's look at Milton Farmer Page. And for more Vegas stories, you can get a Kindle or paperback copy of Vegas and the Chicago Outfit at Amazon.